Hi there, welcome to Drick's room. My name is Drick. Good to see y'all again. It's been a little bit, but we are back today with a bit of breaking news. Well, not really super breaking, but still some news that's worth talking about. Anyway, if you applied to colleges in the 2020 to 2021 application cycle, this doesn't really apply to you, but if you're applying to colleges in the 2021 to 2022 cycle, and maybe even after that, this is definitely something you'll want to be aware of. So I have two bits of news I want to cover today. The first of which is that just the other day, College Board announced that it would be permanently discontinuing SAT subject tests as well as the optional SAT-essay section. International students will still have the option to take subject tests for the time being, but those will also be phased out for them by the end of the summer. This means that all that's really left now is the standard SAT exams, although they may not be staying around for too much longer either, but we'll talk about that more later. College Board's decision to drop these exams comes after an entire application cycle where standardized testing across the board was pretty limited. Even the SAT itself was optional for the most part this year. And since the subject tests and essays weren't all that popular to begin with, College Board finally decided to pull the plug on them. Personally, I'm kinda sad to see the subject tests go. It might be weird of me to say this, but I kinda enjoyed going into them with minimal preparation and seeing how well I could do. It seems like College Board is going to focus more on AP exams since those have become more widely taken over the past couple years as the number of people who take subject tests have declined over that same period. As for me, I preferred taking subject tests since they were, all multiple choice, and I wasn't the biggest fan of writing DBQs and essays in general. But to each their own, I suppose. I think it'll be interesting to see how AP exams are gonna change as a result of this new policy. Unlike subject tests, I don't think we'll see AP exams, vanish into oblivion since they can be used for college credit, but never say never. Maybe we'll even see some new AP courses like AP Korean or AP Math 2. But, who knows? But I know that for international students especially, the end of subject tests may not be a completely happy occasion because those who would have taken subject tests now might have to switch to taking AP exams, which, as I've already mentioned, is a lot more work. This is even more challenging for international students who do not have AP courses built into their curriculum, so it's hard to say right now how this all will affect international applicants. My thought is that this move signals that standardized test scores will be de-emphasized across the board for all applicants, whether domestic or international, but really only time will tell. On the other hand, however, I am super happy to see that the SAT essay has been Thanos-snapped away. This decision has absolutely no bearing on me whatsoever because I am already in college, but I am glad to see it gone. I don't know if I've ever talked about this before, but I took the SAT essay the second time I took the SAT, and I did very, very poorly on it. I'm pretty sure I got something like 15 out of 24, and I think that's completely nonsense because I know I can write a high school level 5-paragraph essay. So I never took the SAT essay ever again. Basically, I don't think the SAT essay is a very good test, so good riddance. In the first place, you'll already be writing a bunch of essays for your Common App, so schools are going to be able to see your writing skills regardless of the SAT, which is probably why not many students took it to begin with. Okay, now, so when I was originally working on the script for this video, I had this whole bit where I talked about how I thought that even though the SAT has basically been stripped down to its bare bones at this point, there would always be a place for it in college admissions. Because, although the scores are pretty arbitrary and definitely more a measure of test taking ability and wealth than actual intelligence or college readiness, it still is a standardized score. You know, everyone comes from different schools, so grading and curriculum are gonna vary a lot, especially when you bring in international students into the mix. So, even though SAT scores are ultimately meaningless and are just used for the sake of admissions and aren't at all good predictors of life outcomes, they still gave schools a baseline to go off of when looking at applicants. Obviously, SATs were never as serious as the Gaokao or the Suning or that French exam I'm forgetting the name of, but I did think that the SAT would be here to stay. So I had this whole bit planned where I talked about all the reasons why I thought standardized testing would always be a thing, because of course it had to be. Well, so recently, a pretty big number of schools have announced that they will be going test optional for another year. Schools like Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, and UPenn have all announced that they will be going test optional for the class of 2026. Other schools like Amherst College and Williams College have already gone a step further to remove testing requirements for the class of 2027. Class of 2027 doesn't even sound real, dude. In the past, a lot of schools have already been test optional for a while, but I don't think it was until recently that top schools have started to follow suit. In 2018, UChicago announced that it would be going test optional, and this past application cycle, the UC system announced that it would be phasing out testing requirements completely. But for the most part, test optional schools were not considered the norm. UC schools are a bit different since they use a different application, but schools like UChicago and the like were pretty rare. This past cycle, it wasn't a super big surprise to see that schools went test optional for the most part. I mean, it's kinda not a good look to ask your students to take exams during a global pandemic. But now, seeing that a lot of the big names have gone test optional for another year, it's starting to look like the dominoes are finally falling down. So what are my thoughts on all this? I mean, that's why you clicked on this video. Like I talked about earlier, just a couple weeks ago, I thought standardized tests were gonna exist forever. But now I'm starting to think that the days of the SAT and ACT are numbered. Obviously, I'm not a top executive at College Board or whoever runs the ACT, but I wouldn't be surprised if standardized tests are completely phased out in a few years. I think that 1 year of being test optional is more of an exception than anything else, but going test optional for 2, 3, or even more years in a row, now that could spell some change. And if big schools like the UCs, including UC Chicago, can go without standardized testing at all, I'd say we could see other schools following them. I think the real critical point is going to be if the Ivy League decides to completely drop testing requirements moving forward, at which point we'll see schools leave the SAT and ACT en masse. But of course, that is all speculation. Maybe if things get better in a year or two from now, everyone will bring back the SATs like they're restaurants and bars that have been waiting for months to reopen. No one really knows anything. You know, I'm sure even colleges don't have the foresight to know what their next steps are. We just gotta take things in stride. And by we, I mean you all, because I'm already done with the SAT forever. But anyway, how is this gonna affect college admissions going forward? I'm sure that's what you guys are most curious about, because that's what's gonna be directly affecting you all the most. I think it would be fair to say that standardized testing is a kind of barrier to higher education for a lot of people. And with standardized testing mostly gone for the time being, that barrier is also gone for the time being. You know, we've already started to see that this year with applicant numbers for a lot of schools just shooting to the moon. Kind of like GameStop. For the class of 2024, Harvard had around 40,000 applicants. But for the class of 2025, they had around 57,000, which is over a 40% increase. Elsewhere, Brown saw an increase in applications by 25%, Duke's numbers went up over 20%, and UCLA went up nearly 25% to 168,000 applicants. 168,000 applicants. So clearly, with less requirements for applying to schools, more people want to apply to schools. But although there are more people applying, there are not more spots to apply for. So naturally, this year we're likely to see a pretty distinct drop in acceptance rates across schools. RD decisions haven't come out for most schools at the time of recording, but if EA and ED decisions can tell us anything, acceptance rates are definitely going to drop. Compared to last cycle, in the early round, Harvard dropped from 13.9% to 7.4%. MIT dropped from 7.3% to 4.7%. Yale dropped from 13.8% to 10.5%, and so on. The early rounds tend to have higher acceptance rates because of various factors, including a smaller and more competitive pool of applicants, student athletes, and so on. So if these numbers can tell us anything, it's that this might be the most competitive year for college admissions to date. Think about it this way. The national average for the SAT is around a 1050. Most people who are serious about top schools tend to have higher scores in the 14 to 1500s, which is a deterrent for a lot of prospective students who think that they'd have no chance. So with this barrier gone, since a lot of schools are going test optional, they're more likely to apply for the sake of applying, hoping for that 1 in a million chance of getting in against the odds. But I think that even though acceptance rates are going to go down, schools will end up accepting more students overall. I think we've already started to see that with higher numbers of students being admitted from early rounds. For ED schools, part of this is to secure a certain number of guaranteed students, but another part of this is the uncertainty of keeping non-restricted students. The world is still very much in disarray, and a lot of people are going through more financial difficulties than ever before. This means that even though students get accepted to a school, they may not be able to afford it. In other words, schools may be preparing for lower yields this year. So to balance this, schools may try to accept a higher number of students to keep their final class size relatively consistent with prior classes. Again, of course, this is all just me guessing, I'm not an admissions officer or anything, so I don't really know anything. I would imagine that the number of highly qualified applicants is going to be pretty consistent with previous years, even though there are more applicants overall. Because just having more applicants doesn't mean that the number of highly qualified applicants is going to increase proportionally, because a lot of the highly qualified applicants would have already applied anyway. But who knows? College admissions is a mystery, even more so this year, I'd say. I suppose we'll have to wait to see how things work out this year before we can make any predictions for future years. So in short, the death of the SAT subject tests and the SAT essay will most likely increase whatever effects we see in college admissions this year, next year. We'll probably be seeing lower acceptance rates, but who knows just how low they'll go. The SAT itself is not dead, at least not yet. So for juniors, sophomores, and everyone in younger grades, the SAT may stick around for a few more years, or it may not, but going test optional across all schools may de-emphasize its importance moving on. This means that you're gonna have to really devote your focuses academic-wise towards your grades and AP exams or IB exams or whatever. But the decline of standardized testing means that schools will have to pay more attention to other aspects of your applications, like your activities, awards, and essays. In the past, a lot of people, and by a lot of people I mean people who make college application stats videos here on YouTube, will tell you that the SAT doesn't really matter that much for admissions. I'm sure I've said it a number of times myself. By that, I meant that after a certain point, going for a higher score brings diminishing returns, since you really only need to meet a school's threshold for standardized test scores. But the absence of standardized test scores will have a pronounced effect on college admissions, and we know this because we're already starting to see it this year. For a while, there have been a lot of criticisms against standardized testing, and the COVID pandemic has been the sort of impetus for finally addressing these criticisms. I think college admissions are going to be going through some big changes in the coming years, and it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to the modern day. So, if you're going to be applying to college next year or in the next few years, and you'd like some advice, feel free to check out some of my other videos on various aspects of the college application process. And to the seniors waiting on their decisions for a few more weeks, please try to take your mind off things. Go watch some anime. You know, this season has a lot of great shows that can really help you de-stress. And good luck, guys. See you all next time. Bye.